Our speaker this evening was described the other day in the Washington Post as the House Republicans' prophet, their intellectual, and their resident wonk. Chairman of the House Budget Committee in his 7th term from Wisconsin's 1st District, he won by 68% in the 2010 election. Hair shirt to the president and his economic team. Congressman Ryan is one of conservatism's most able legislators and articulate spokesmen. It gives me great pleasure to introduce him, give a very warm welcome to Congressman Paul Ryan.
Thanks, man. Hair shirt to the president. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Hair shirt to the president. That's the first time I've ever had that kind of an introduction. The best thing I can say about that introduction is it's the most recent one I've ever had. So thank you. Bob and I were talking about 2 weeks ago, and he came up to me and he said, our keynote speaker bailed on us at the last minute. Can you fill in a pinch and speak at our dinner? So I pulled out my BlackBerry, I looked at my schedule, and it said, let's see, Monday, the first, dinner with Jim Sensenbrenner is what I had on my schedule. And I figured, you know what? This way I'll have a chance to say something and I won't have to pay for dinner. So, yeah, you're on. I'll come do it. So, Jim's a good buddy. Also, let me just say, I was a staffer with Barbara Olson. Just a regal woman, just a wonderful lady. And so, Stan, congratulations. What an honor to have an honor in her name. Fantastic. And we have these great, fantastic new freshmen. And I was speaking to one of them the other day, a thoracic surgeon, came to Congress, never thought he'd be in Congress. He asked me for a reading list of economics books to read. So you go through the Austrians, like we all do, and give them the list. And then I said, if you want to learn about what really happened in the 1980s, Bob Bartley, 7 Fat Years. I worked for Bill Bennett and Jack Kemp in those days when he wrote that book. And by the way, Bill Bennett got his start in government as the chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And Bob Bartley was just an icon. So the other person whose book I referenced, a person here is here, I've never met, I've always wanted to meet, was the author of Wealth and Poverty, George Gilder. So I don't even know where he is. There he is. Great. So that is on the House freshman reading list, 7 Fat Years, Wealth and Poverty, along with the Austrians and all the other great books that really have defined what we believe in our movement. It's late, so I want to get to the point. I would basically say that at no time more than our time now, we basically have a choice of two futures in front of us. We all know this. It's all coming to a one big crescendo. It doesn't really matter what generation you're in. This is the most precarious moment in your lifetime. And if you want to take a look at those two futures, it's basically a choice between what I would call the path that the president has put us on, debt, doubt, and decline, or whether or not we're going to reclaim these founding principles that made us great in the first place: liberty, freedom, self-determination, government by consent of the governed, all these ideas where our rights actually come from nature and God, not from government. We reapply those ideas and we will get ourselves back on a path to prosperity. And so when you take a look at this choice that we have in front of us, look at where we are right now. Let's just do a quick cursory review of the fact that the president had the government he wanted for 2009, 2010, and largely implemented virtually his entire agenda. Higher taxes, more dependency, more bureaucratic control, an absolute duck of the debt, total inaction on the drivers of our debt. Now, if you want to see what this looks like, at the end of the day, look no further than Europe. And if you look at Europe, you can see what lies ahead for us. And that is basically, I would argue, are facing two tipping points. One's a fiscal tipping point, the other one a moral tipping point. The fiscal tipping point, that's pretty easy. That's math. That's the debt we have. That's the healthcare law. That's the trajectory we are on, where literally the debt gets out of our control and we no longer are in control of our economic and our fiscal destiny. That leads to broken promises to people who've organized their lives around these programs and to crushing tax hikes. You know, for a little thought experiment, because at the Budget Committee we get to ask the CBO to run all these numbers for us. I love doing that. It's very fun to do. I asked the Congressional Budget Office, what will the tax rates have to be on my kids, you know, when they're my age? I'm 41. You know, Jen and I live in Janesville. Our kids are 6, 8, and 9. What are their tax rates going to have to be, you know, when I'm looking at grandkids? They said, we can do that. We have this computer model, and we'll get back to you. They got back to me. Lowest tax bracket for lower income tax Americans, which is at 10% today, that goes up to 25%. And then they said the middle income tax bracket, that one goes to 66% for all middle income payers. And then the top tax rate, the one that all those subchapter S corporations, all those successful small businesses pay, that goes to 88%. And then in the next sentence they said, this could have some negative effects at the economy at that time. So even the bean counters in government have this thing figured out. The point is, we are reaching a fiscal tipping point. The moral tipping point is even worse. And the moral tipping point is, before too long, we could become a society we were never, ever intended to be. We could become a society where the net majority of Americans are takers, not makers. Another great think tank, the Tax Foundation, runs lots of good numbers. Those of you who know me, I'm kind of a numbers guy. 20% of Americans, according to the Tax Foundation, get 75% of their income from the federal government. They're dependent. Another 20% of Americans get 40% of their income from the federal government, so they're reliant. Today, 70% of Americans get more benefits from the federal government in dollar value than they pay back in taxes. So you could argue that we're already past that tipping point. The good news is, survey after survey, poll after poll, still shows that we are a center-right 70-30 country. 70% of Americans want the American dream. They believe in the American idea. Only 30% want the welfare state. What that tells us is at least half of those people who are currently in that category are there not of their wish or their will. They believe in that horizon that they're shooting for. They're down on their luck. They're out of their job. They're back at school. They want the American idea, and they want their kids to be better off. But slowly but surely, if we don't watch this, if we allow all this government that is being stacked up kick in, we will reach that moral tipping point. So why don't we just quickly review what government is up to these days? And I'll give you the Cliff Note version, because this could go on for a while. Stimulus, the idea of stimulus was borrow a bunch of money, spend it, will create jobs. Well, $862 billion were borrowed, $1.1 trillion when you add all the borrowing costs. What happened? Did the millions of jobs get created? Did unemployment prevent itself from going above 8%? No, it didn't work. It went to 10%, and now it's at 9.1%. More to the point, we saw in that time frame an 84% increase in domestic government agency budgets. The budget that passed in 2009, it called for spending $46 trillion over the next 10 years. The reason I mentioned the budget that passed in 2009 is because that's the budget we're still living under, because Jeff Sessions' counterpart and the people who serve in the majority in the Senate have just chosen for over 900 days now not to even bother passing a budget. We haven't had a budget for 2 years in Congress. We've passed ours in the House, nothing in the Senate for 2 years, so we're still under that budget. What about taxes? This one could take a while, but I'll give you the Cliff Notes on that as well. The top tax rate in 14 months is going to 44.8%. The President and the Senate are now calling for bringing that top tax rate up to 50%. Now, the President likes to say this is just going to hit millionaires. You know, baseball players, movie stars, Wall Street CEOs. Here are the facts. 80% of all businesses in America, 80%, pay their taxes as individuals. They're not what we call corporations. We call them pass-throughs, subchapter S corporations, LLCs, partnerships. 90% of them in Wisconsin. And you know, overseas, which in Wisconsin we often refer to as Lake Superior, the Canadians, they're dropping their tax rate on their businesses in January to 15%. And so the president and the Senate want to bring it to 50%? Heck, China's at 25. Ireland's at 12.5. Britain's lowering theirs to 22. These new taxes are going to hit about 50% of small business income. Let's just go on a thought experiment here. Let's say we need to do it because people aren't paying their fair share. If you confiscated all of the income from all Fortune 500 companies, it'd run the government for 45 days. Why don't we just get the millionaires? Take 100% of the income from everybody in business earning over $1 million, that would run the government for 4 months. Or everybody making over $250,000, that would run the government for 6 months. The point is, there isn't even enough money there to make that math add up. If we just let the top two tax rates expire as they're scheduled to do in about 14 months, that would satisfy about 8.5% of the deficit spending that the president has already passed in his budget. Let's think about regulations. This is not the sexiest of all issues. A lot of folks who don't experience the regulatory state themselves have a hard time getting their mind around this. Think of it as basically a hidden tax. Congress was really busy in 2009 and 2010. You know lots of the laws that passed. Then there are a lot of underbrush laws that passed as well. And so now that we have divided government, thank heavens we do. I'll take a step for that. We've got a new regulatory state that is firing on all cylinders. So Congress passed all these big multi-thousand-page laws in 2009 and 2010, and now in 2011, it is regulatory time. In 2010, 3,573 new regulations were issued from the federal government. This year, 4,257 new regulations are being churned out of Washington. 219 of those planned regulations each cost the economy over $100 million. Regulations are estimated to cost about $1.75 trillion a year out of a $15 trillion economy. You know, one of them, which makes no sense where I come from, is estimated to shut down 20% of our ready-mix concrete plants. So we have to now import cement when we want to, or as they say in Texas, cement. We now have to import our concrete just to build things. What's happening is basically a systematic replacement of the founding principle of the rule of law with the rule of men. And we are delegating so much power and authority to unelected bureaucrats. This is the virtue of progressivism. This is the penultimate goal of that thought experiment. Pass vague laws in Congress, delegate all this permanent authority to a large class of bureaucrats to write the rules. And so we see things like the NLRB preventing businesses from moving to states of their choosing. We see all these new cap-and-trade-like rules coming out of the EPA. And we see the Energy Department acting as the world's worst venture capital fund. What you get with all of this at the end of the day is basically what I call a system of crony capitalism, of corporate welfare. And here's the point. Republicans need to acknowledge this. We have not been the best on this issue ourselves. We've got to acknowledge that being pro-business is not necessarily being pro-market. And so when you take a look at the real class warfare that this leads us to, it's really a class of connected crony capitalists of corporate welfare calling the shots, rigging the rules, keeping their perch atop society so that the budding entrepreneur, the Steve Jobs of tomorrow, has no chance of getting off the ground and making an idea work. This is something that has to stop. Take a look at our monetary policy. Now, this is not necessarily the fault of the president, but I just have to say they are really putting the fiat back into fiat money. What we really need is sound money. Turn over to our foreign policy. There really are people who just believe in this country that if you say the following, it's offensive. America is an exceptional nation. That means I think it's better than the other nations. I'm happy to say that, proud to say that. Problem is, put the bad foreign policy aside, our foreign policy is on a collision course with our fiscal policy. And so even if we believe in exceptionalism, even if we believe in being that beacon of hope and opportunity, of expressing democratic capitalism around the world, if we allow this fiscal train to keep running down the current path, we won't have anything for a foreign policy. In 1970, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid were 20% of the budget. Today, they're over 40%. 1970, our defense budget was 39% of the federal budget. Today, when you add all the other things we're doing, it's under 16% of our budget. Everything is crowded out by all the spending on social welfare programs. That leads me to health care. This new health care law, 159 new bureaucrats, boards, and panels, price controls starting next year by an unelected board of bureaucrats called the Independent Payment Advisory Board. If you were one of the lucky companies, you know, the connected ones, the unions who got the 1,400 waivers, you're okay for a year. If you're like anybody else in society, not so lucky. The point is, if we don't get our handle on this program, on this idea, this driver of inflation, of debt, there is no way we'll have fiscal space for anything else. 3 programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, along with their interest, consume 100% of federal revenues by the year 2025. By the time my kids are my age, the size of government, instead of taking 20 cents out of every dollar the federal government, let me say that again. Instead of taking 20 cents out of every dollar everybody in America makes for the federal government, we'll be taking 40 cents on the current path we are on. Double the size of government, and the debt will be about quadruple the size of our economy at that time. So we know this is not good. Where does this all lead us? What's the moral of this story? If you copy European policies, you get European results. Now, this is not a good record to run on, because look at the results. The misery index is above 13%. Unemployment's above 9%. Food stamp consumption went from about 28 million to about 46 million in just the past few years. So we don't have a good record here that one would want to run on if they're running on their record. And if you're not willing to change course, what's left? This is what is perhaps the most troubling, in my opinion. It's so regrettable that this debate about our future is in which the way the president is now choosing to conduct this debate. Never mind the straw man or the scapegoat arguments. What is most concerning is the commitment to division. You see, class warfare, that might make for good politics, but it makes for rotten economics, and it divides a country. Preying on the emotions of fear and envy and class resentment, that just makes America weaker, not stronger. We don't believe that the economic pie of life is some fixed thing, and therefore the government must divide up the slices more equitably. We want to grow the pie. That's the whole point. Redistributing wealth does not create more of it. And speaking to people as if they're stuck in some class, as if they're stuck in some station in life, victim to circumstances beyond their control, and that the government's job is to help them cope with it. Well, you know what? That is not who we are, and that's never who we were ever meant to be. Those are the kinds of countries we fled to create this country. And so when you get down to the essence of this discussion, when you get down to the politics of playing one group against another, what it really does is it distracts us from the true sources of inequity of this agenda. The corporate welfare and the crony capitalism that enrich the powerful and the connected, and the empty promises that betrayed the powerless. Look, my family came here when they stopped growing potatoes in Ireland in the 1850s. They came here, and everybody has their own story. They came here for a better life, for upward mobility, for a future, to make it for themselves. This is what the American idea is all about. Now, the good news is that we are still this country we want to become, that we want to improve. We just have to perfect it. We still are that American idea. We still believe in the opportunity society with a safety net. We just don't want to turn that safety net into a hammock that ends up lulling people into lives of complacency and dependency. That turns able-bodied people into lives where they are drained of their incentive and their will to make the most of their life. We believe in upward mobility. We believe in equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. And these are the things that have made us so special and so unique. They've made us strong at home and therefore stronger abroad. They've given the world this great goal to shoot for. And at a time when the world is in doubt, at a time when the world economic system, when Europe has this debt crisis, nothing more could help world prosperity and American prosperity than a recommitment to those founding principles that made us so great in the first place. I get this. I work for the 1st District of Wisconsin, a district that Michael Dukakis won, that Bill Clinton won, that Al Gore won, that Barack Obama won. I don't come from, the red part of America. We beat John Kerry, by the way, because nobody could relate to that guy. You come to Wisconsin and talk about Lambert Field instead of Lambeau, and just no way you're winning our area. And you come and eat foie gras, which we didn't know what foie gras was until John Kerry came, instead of our custard and burgers. You're just not going to win. The point I'm trying to make is people who don't think of themselves as political, who don't think of themselves as, a Reagan Republican, they get this. They know what makes us special. They know what made us unique. And all we have to do is have the courage of our convictions to get this right. And that's why I'm excited. That's why I'm really optimistic about all of this. In the House, we're doing our best to show you, our fellow countrymen, what it is we would do to fix these problems. It's not enough to just criticize and to talk about how we don't like the direction the president's taking the country. We clearly don't. It's more to put proposals and specifics based on core principles and have the strength and the courage of our convictions to act on those things. That's the mistake the Republicans made earlier. We're not going to make that mistake again. So what I would simply say is, because of the strength of the new people who came to Congress, because of the people who came not for a career in politics, but for a cause of saving America, because of the obvious inadequacies and deficiencies of what I call modern liberalism, not classical liberalism, modern liberalism, the record is clear. The rhetoric is awful. We are not going to reelect somebody who gave us an agenda of being a uniter and not a divider, only to watch him turn into a divider. That's not going to happen. And so the question is, are we going to give you, our fellow countrymen, a specific agenda of ideas to save this country, get us on the right track? And I think we will. And if we do that, and if we win that election, that referendum, that reaffirmation of the American idea, then we will have the moral obligation, the right, and the honor to actually implement it. And again, guess what? We will have morning again in America. And we will save the American idea, because it's worth saving. The majority of us know it. So let's just get on with it. Thank you for advancing these ideas at the American Spectator. Thank you very, very much.